This is Keys to the Shop, episode 213, Coping with Corona Using Emotional Intelligence, with Andrea Hoban of Oji Life Lab. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Quickly, if you have not yet subscribed to the show, I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. And also, I want to make you aware that Keys to the Shop is now started a Mighty Networks group. And that is a private group of Keys to the Shop listeners, professionals just like yourself, coming together to discuss all aspects of coffee shop life and helping each other solve problems, get ideas, and just generally connect. And so that's on the Mighty Networks platform. And if you'd like to be a part of that community, all you need to do is either go to that group and request to join, or you can just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com, and let me know that you would like to join that group. We are building that up slowly but surely, and I'm really excited about the conversations that we're already having in that Mighty Network, Keys to the Shop. So hope to see you there. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the world's best specialty coffee equipment suppliers. And why that is they put so much energy into curating the best equipment from all over the globe. And then equally, they put energy into making sure that you are getting the right equipment for your situation. So when you're in the market for commercial equipment, you want espresso machines, grinders, brewers, things like that, or even things like under-counter refrigeration, they'll make sure that you're set up to succeed. And that's really what they're about. So when you go to the website, prima-coffee.com, you'll see all the selection, which is amazing, but you'll also see a lot of free resources in the form of blogs or videos, instructions on how to use the equipment and how to make great coffee, because they not only want to equip you with great equipment, but also with the skills necessary to create great coffee. So I highly recommend that you partner with Prima Coffee when it comes to your commercial coffee equipment. Go check them out again, prima-coffee.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by the amazing Pacific Barista series. That is the line of plant-based performance beverages that are designed for the barista and by baristas, essentially. They are tested by some of the best baristas in the world before they even hit the shelves, before they're released, to make sure that they actually do perform to the highest level possible on the bar. So whether you're using the almond, soy, hemp, rice, coconut, oat milk, whatever you choose, you can be certain that you're going to get a beverage that stands up to the heat from steaming, produces amazing latte art ready texture, and keeps the flavor balance focused on coffee. These are just top of the line products, and they are a leader in this field for a reason. And I think that you should have them in your store. Your customers deserve the best from you. And Pacific's Barista series is the line of plant-based beverages that will really exceed your customers' expectations. So go check them out, pacificfoods.com. Just follow the link in the show notes to get to the food service section. Get these in your store and try them out for yourself and see how the Barista series from Pacific can really elevate the plant-based beverages in your store. Okay, so today we are talking about coping with COVID with emotional intelligence. And we are welcoming back to the show Andrea Hoban, who was a guest on the show back in episode 176, Harnessing Emotions at Work. And that was such a phenomenal episode and a great conversation about emotional intelligence and emotions in the workplace. Now is such a great time to talk about this subject because our emotions are running at full speed all day long. Whether you're an owner, a barista, or anyone in the coffee industry, the uncertainty of the situation that we're going through has our emotions on high alert. And what do we do with those emotions? How do we harness them? How do we lead ourselves? And how do we lead our staff with emotional intelligence? What are some practical ways to do that? That is the conversation we are going to be having today. Now, Andrea is a co-founder and chief learning officer over at Oji Life Lab. She possesses more than 20 years of experience in leading large teams and building businesses. As a senior director of corporate learning, she established a global team of designers and trainers that deployed job skills training to 10,000 internal employees. She's built a reputation on successfully leading enterprise-wide projects, building teams, and developing talent. She is a certified executive coach and leadership development practitioner who has helped hundreds of professionals learn to harness their emotions and to achieve their goals. At Oji, she is reimagining the way we learn skills like emotional intelligence to directly impact the quality of our lives. Andrea is also a very sought-after speaker, having presented at many state and national conferences. She has served as board president for herwisdom.org, executive director of the Portland chapter of Women in Technology, and a member of the National Association of Female Executives. So we are really fortunate to be able to talk with Andrea today. And today's conversation is sparked by a small ebook guide that Oji Life Lab put out to help people cope with the COVID crisis using emotional intelligence. We'll be linking to that in the show notes and discussing it here in this conversation. So we're talking about tools to use, tactics, insights, things that are going to be very actionable for you and give you guidance on how to increase your emotional intelligence and cope with what's going on in the world today in a very emotionally healthy way. So with all that said, here now is my conversation on emotional intelligence with Andrea Hoban. Andrea, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. How are you doing?
You know what, Chris? I think I'm managing just like everyone else. You know, some days are good, some days are not so good. But you happen to catch me on a good one. So I'm glad I'm here to talk with you today.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, the amount of time that a lot of us are spending at home, it can be maddening. And then imagining what's going on in the outside world and getting fed all of the stuff that's, imagined that it's going to happen to you. And then the actual stuff that's happening to us, it's just so much to deal with. And, I'm glad you're doing well. And I'm glad we're talking about this today because emotional intelligence is obviously a really important topic to talk about in the midst of this crisis.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it's one thing that we've become really aware of, I would say, is how many emotions we might experience in a day. And, we often talk about the emotional roller coaster in the work that I do with clients, that even on a regular day, pre-COVID, that you might experience hundreds of emotions and then you're up and you're down and you don't even really notice it. But here we are sitting in our homes and the peaks and valleys of what we're feeling might be more extreme than what we're used to. And so we're more aware of how many emotions we have and how many of them might actually be unpleasant right now. And even to that end, we polled about 250 people nationwide 2 weeks ago and asked them, what is the most common emotion you're experiencing right now? And the answer was an undeniable anxiety. And not so different than a study that Mark Brackett at Yale did with 5,000 teachers at the end of March, where he posed that same question. And again, the answer was the same. Anxiety was the number one felt emotion. And so, we all have this worry and we have a sense of uncertainty about the future. So why wouldn't we be experiencing some anxiety right now? And if we can build some skill around emotional intelligence, then we might in fact find some ways to cope or manage ourselves and our families through it in a way that's skillful and helpful to creating some better outcomes, whether that's relationships or our performance in the work that we do have, or just in the way that we manage our way through to the end. So, it's key, as you mentioned, and really foundational to a lot of other activities that help us really feel mental and physical well-being.
Yeah. I mean, we're trying to chase that feeling of well-being in ways, people have taken up all sorts of hobbies and we're trying to remain optimistic as much as we can, but not deny reality. And this is not obviously something that is encouraging people to just not deal with their, unpleasant emotions that they're experiencing, but, maybe more like you said, managing it and like acquiring more positive things that you would want, because I don't think anybody really wants to live in anxiety, and we may have felt all of these emotions before, but when you're talking about the roller coaster, I mean, that's a fast ride, you know? This is
Yeah.
like a slow motion roller coaster, it feels like. From an anxiety,
Right.
I'm like really there for a long time and then up again for maybe a little long time. I don't know. It just seems like deeper and longer than the normal emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. So that your experience is that when you do feel some semblance of anxiousness, that it seems to go deeper and last longer than if you were, out in the world in our pre-COVID reality.
Sure. I mean, because you could distract, or at least I could distract myself with, something else and say, you know what, I felt anxious, but now I don't know, I went for a walk and now I'm good,
Right.
I'm fine. It doesn't seem as easy to kind of snap out of it as it used to.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet you a lot of people are nodding their heads right now when they hear you say that, again, because there's not as much to distract us. We're just at home.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not as many things that we can go, look over there, or let me work on this thing. To a great extent, emotions are all temporary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're doing more things in our day, then chances are there's more input, more stimuli that create different kinds of emotional realities for us that shift us out of anxiety. But here we are faced with countless headlines that are warning us of doom and danger. And it's no wonder that we feel anxious, even, if that's the input and there is no other input. When we're left to worry about our jobs or our homes or our ability to buy groceries or find toilet paper for that matter,
Right.
then why wouldn't we walk around with this uneasy feeling of a future that you cannot control? And so, yes, I do think it can have the potential to last longer and be more intense than it was before. And so we seem to need some strategies on how to grapple with that feeling. And when it's unhelpful to what we're trying to do, to shift out of it. And that takes, again, some skill, because we were never taught these things growing up, and we certainly weren't taught them in school, and we're all just kind of feeling our way in the dark.
Right.
So your point is really well taken. And, I've just read an article in the New York Times today about how to manage panic attacks, because, that's happening more often too. I mean, you take anxiousness to the extreme. It can literally physically take you down.
Oh yeah. I mean I have history with panic attacks, and thankfully they haven't been an issue now, but that is really rough. Now to that end of like managing and having tools to manage, that is exactly what Oji does. And it's what you put out this book called Coping with Corona. It's a short ebook.
Yep.
It's like tips and strategies. It's very well done. There's a cool interview at the end, and most of it though is giving some bullet point formatted steps and guides, and that's what I want to talk about today, because we do need those tools. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about first of all, in the book we're talking about like getting the zeroing in on the emotions that we do have. And you talk about the mood meter. Can you explain a little bit about the mood meter? Because that's kind of how the book starts off. And where do we go from there?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'd love to explain the mood meter. So imagine you are looking at a 4-square grid where the x-axis represents the pleasantness factor of the emotions we experience. Some emotions are very pleasant and some are really not pleasant. And then you have a y-axis that runs from top to bottom. And that one represents energy, where sometimes we say the activation of an emotion in our system. So there are emotions that are quite low in energy, and there are others that are quite high in energy. So when you put the X and Y axis together, you get 4 quadrants. And so the upper right-hand quadrant is the quadrant of high pleasantness and high energy, where you find emotions like joy, happiness, feeling motivated, those kinds of things. When you look at the lower right-hand corner, we actually color code these. So the upper right corner, that's high energy, high pleasantness, we think of as the yellow quadrant. And then in the lower right-hand corner where you've got low energy, but still high pleasantness, you find emotions like calm, rested, grateful, etc. And then if you shift over to the unpleasant side of the mood meter, the lower left-hand corner is the quadrant of low energy, low pleasantness emotions, where you would find things that range from apathy, pessimism, boredom, sadness, misery, depression, etc., which leaves us with the high energy, low pleasantness quadrant that's in the upper left-hand side of the square that I'm imagining here. And that one is red in its color and offers both the anger family of emotions and the fear family of emotions. And so in our model, which this mood meter actually came from research out of Yale. It's a tool that Mark Brackett has developed and used over time. And for us adults, it's quite useful and practical to map what we're feeling to one of these four quadrants, because I may not have the words to describe what I'm feeling right away, but I can probably gauge that I'm feeling some factor of low pleasantness. Like if we were describing anxiety like we've been, then that doesn't feel very pleasant. And it does feel pretty high in energy. You know, I feel agitated in my body. Maybe my heart's racing a bit. Maybe even my palms are sweating. You know, that's pretty high energy. So I would now note that I'm in the red quadrant. And over time, we can plot where we live emotionally. How often am I in the red quadrant? How often am I actually in the pleasant quadrants of yellow and green? And is there balance between the four quadrants in my life? Because one thing that I think it's important to state is it's not that anxiety is bad. There are no bad emotions. All emotions are information. And when we treat them objectively like that, then we might be able to do more with what we discover about our emotional experience. If I go, I'm really anxious right now, and that's really not pleasant, rather than pretending I'm not, or just trying to pretend it doesn't matter, then instead I can say, I wonder what's causing that anxiety right now. I just spent 30 minutes online reading headlines from national newspapers. That probably didn't help.
Right. As helpful as they want to be. It's not
right.
Doing the trick.
Or maybe I just got off the phone with my mother, and now I'm quite worried about her well-being and her health, and there's nothing I can do about that because I can't go see her right now. You know, if we can get to the root and understand the cause of our emotions, then we have more capacity to make choices about what we want to do about them.
So when you're at that point of choosing what to do about them, one of the things that you suggest in this guide is a reframing. And you go from reframing to labeling. I think what you're describing is kind of self-talk. So you're talking to yourself like, I can't help this person, or I'm feeling this and I don't know how to get out of it. And a lot of what we're doing in isolation, I imagine too, is we are in our own heads way more. So there's this self-talk that's happening, but your suggestion in this guide is to take control of that self-talk and to reframe things and label it. Like, take us through that. What does that do for us, and how do we do that?
Well, it's one of the most powerful ways we can actually shift from one emotion to another, is noticing our self-talk and when it's negative. And I would even say that it's not that we experience more self-talk now. It's just the volume's turned way up because the volume of everything else is turned way down. So I think, we're much more in tune with what some people would call our inner critic, or this voice that, says things like not good enough, or, causes us to think about worst case scenarios all the time. But we hear that voice, and we hear it very clearly now. And when we do, if we can change the narrative, then we can quite effectively change our emotional state. So I'll give you an example. I have a friend who just recently applied for a job, and 3 days after his interview, he still had not heard from the potential employer. So there's an opportunity for self-talk, right? Which he had plenty of, like, Obviously I'm not going to get it. I would have heard from them by now. I should just not even worry about it anymore. But gosh, I really want it. And, all this stuff that we work up in our heads about how clearly that job is not going to land on my lap now. And instead, he chose to use some reframing. So to look at the situation a little differently and talk to himself using different language. And it actually turns out that recent research has shown that when we use self-talk in the third person, then it actually is even more effective. So rather than me saying, I've got this, I can do it, it's actually more effective to say, you know what? So in the case of my friend and his job is to say, you know what? You've been a job seeker before, and these things always take longer than you ever think they are going to, even when you're the candidate that got the job. So rather than worrying about it now, why don't you just wait till tomorrow to see what's going to happen? Now, that's an example of some self-talk. To continue the idea of reframing, I might actually want to think about the job interviewer's reality. Like maybe I know that they are inundated with applications. Maybe I know that they, over the Easter holiday weekend, they took extra days off based on who employs them. So maybe there's a backlog. So if I'm starting to think about the employer who interviewed me and their reality, then I'm seeing the situation differently. And that also can help change my self-talk and the way I assess the situation, which can shift my mood.
Oh, I see. So in our self-talk is subconscious. A lot of times it's just rumination, and you're just dwelling on something, and you're not literally saying it to yourself, although there is a precedent for people just speaking like, oh, I'm so clumsy, or, I'm just always worried, saying things like that. So is it good to do you need to overcome what has become old hat now to you by overcorrecting to the side of more positive self-talk, more charitable assumptions about the situations around you? Is that something that we should, kind of think about? Because it seems like it might be just drowned out by the momentum of the negative.
Yeah, to the extent we're aware that there is negative self-talk going on in our heads, then a very effective strategy can be to talk back to it in that third person voice. And sometimes it also won't work. There are some emotions, like if we're really up feeling high energy, unpleasant emotions, and we're really activated, we're up in that red quadrant, and we're really fearful, our fight or flight response has really been activated, then simply changing my thinking might actually not be what is required for me to shift my emotional state to something like calm or, somewhere in the green quadrant, as I described before. So to do that, I might actually want to try a different set of strategies, which we call action strategies. So rather, there's this category of strategies that are thinking strategies like reframing, or there's another strategy that we like to talk about called distancing, where I might be in an intense emotional situation with someone in my household even, but perhaps I can draw a picture frame around the interaction I'm having with them and become the observer in it, like I'm watching a TV show. And when I do that, then somehow it becomes less intense for me, but I'm still present in the conversation. So that might be another thinking strategy I can use that's supportive of a better outcome. Like if you're watching your kid melt down over their math homework, rather than being invested in the meltdown, I'm invested in supporting my child. So how could I do that in a way that I stay calm? Because I probably will get a better outcome for both of us if I do that.
And again, this is not avoiding those emotions as though we don't need to deal with like fear as an emotion. I think Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk addressed this, where she was talking about how anxiety can be reframed as I'm excited. And I still use that today when I'm speaking or doing something that I'm nervous about. But I'm taking action. I'm not like, if there's a conversation you're just talking about, the argument, like you need to come to a resolution at some point. So you're not just saying, I'm never going to talk about this again after you put a frame around it. you're addressing it fully on, right?
Exactly. I actually think it's really important to acknowledge what you're feeling in order to be able to modulate your emotions according to your goals. So it's not very helpful to stuff them into a little box and pretend like you're not having them. We all know that is a leaky bucket. They come out in other ways that are really not helpful to our relationships or for us to attaining our goals. So what you're saying is actually really critical, and an important first skill of emotional intelligence is, can I recognize what I'm feeling at the moment that I'm feeling it? How often do I just check in with myself throughout the course of the day and say, well, how am I feeling when I wake up in the morning? Oh, today I feel really good. Or, last week, one day I woke up with what I always think of as the brick on my chest. That's a sign that I've got some anxiety, and it may not even be logical.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's changed. But, I wake up today feeling different than I did yesterday. And that's when I know I need to activate some strategies to support myself. But there are also times where, as you say, the feeling of anxiety, that it has a lot of energy to it, and it can be used for useful purposes. Maybe I have to get a project done today, or, something else is another emotion in the red quadrant, for example, is anger. And anger at its root is about a feeling of injustice. And you see a lot of news stories in the world press these days, especially in our own country, with the shortage of PPEs for our medical professionals, where people are just not having that. And so this feeling of injustice that the people who are trying to protect us don't have the equipment they need are causing people to make masks, to find stores of masks, to get, to help people. So without that feeling of anger, without this feeling that this is unfair and unjust, they wouldn't have been able to take the action to right the wrong.
Right. So in if they had hypothetically allowed that anger to simmer to the point where it was not controlled, they probably wouldn't have been able to creatively, channel that energy into something productive.
Exactly. But to know, to say, wow, I'm really angry about this. This is a totally unfair situation. What can I do about it? Mm-hmm. And anger also has some passion to it. So the ability to recruit people to your cause is amplified when you use that feeling of anger for a good purpose. But I also think it's useful to pull apart this idea that anger, the feeling, and the way we express anger are the same thing, which they're not. They're two separate things. And so a lot of times I work with people who say it's not okay to be angry because they've been around people their whole lives who have expressed anger in very damaging ways. And so when we can acknowledge that, yeah, I can feel angry, but it doesn't mean I have to slam a door or yell at people. It just means I can feel that feeling and determine what I want to do about that. Can I just take a pause, take a breath, and go, wow, I am really angry right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it makes me think about when I hear the word triggered, because, we're being triggered all the time right now with different inputs. But is there a difference between being triggered and just pure recognition of emotion? Like when I recognize that I'm feeling an emotion, is that technically just being triggered? Because triggered sounds to me like I'm being taken for a ride by my emotions almost immediately.
Yeah, well, you normally hear the word triggered, especially when we're talking about emotions that are unpleasant and high in energy. And the truth is that the definition of emotion is our response to a stimuli in our environment. And that stimuli may cause a change in our physiology, in our expression, in our behavior, and in our thinking. And so we can be triggered into a variety of emotional responses by the people that we're around. And so, trigger gets a bad name because we use it to describe like when somebody frustrates me or irritates me or makes me angry, then I'm triggered. But, the truth is that this reaction to a stimuli in our environment, which could be real or imagined, by the way, it doesn't have to be an actual thing. It could be a thought. And all of a sudden, I'm a ruminating runaway train. But it might also be that I'm triggered to feeling hope because an old friend called me, or I'm triggered to feel joy because my young child took my hand.
Mm-hmm.
There's very simple, sweet joys in life that we can be triggered to experience as well. It's not, anything can trigger us to feel a different emotion because we're just responding to stimuli all the time.
Nice. I like reframing the word triggering. That's really good. That we can be triggered to have positive recognize positive emotions. When we're talking about ourselves in our own inner world, as we've been doing, we are also needing to manage the emotions of others sometimes, or not manage. Maybe that's a bad word. For leaders out there who have a team of people who are feeling the same emotions they have. Now, obviously, you've gone through this. Let's say you've gone through the guide and you've done a lot of self-discovery. As a person, empathetically that other people are going through the same things. So how do we approach helping other people that are in our charge, for example, navigate their emotions in a similar way?
That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? Well, first of all, we have to be regulated ourselves. So that means as leaders, I need to do the work of acknowledging and recognizing my own emotional state and tuning my emotional state for the, task at hand, which might mean that, I get a call from one of my employees whose aunt has fallen ill to the virus. It's not that I need to be shifting to the yellow quadrant. That would be highly inappropriate and upsetting probably to the person I'm talking to on the phone. Instead, it might be appropriate to shift myself into the blue quadrant, the quadrant of these lower energy, unpleasant emotions, because that also is the quadrant of compassion and sympathy. And I want to meet this person where they're at and be able to talk to them in a way that feels very human. And that's what bonds us together. And that's what creates trust between an employee and their manager. It doesn't mean that this employee doesn't have responsibilities they have to get through the day, but it does mean that the manager understands what they're going through and that they can have a real conversation about how the work will be done and how the manager can support them with their family situation in the meantime. So the manager can only do that if they themselves are not activated into the red, for example. So if I'm anxious and irritable, then my emotions are often contagious to those around me. And I'm going to make other people more anxious. So
right.
If I recognize that I myself am pretty keyed up, then I need to do some things that help me calm down. And that might be using one of those thinking strategies we talked about, or it might be doing something that physically changes my environment or shifts something about my body, that is another way of disrupting the signal. So maybe that means I go stand outside for 2 minutes if that's available to me. And then I come back in and take the call. Or maybe I sit in my chair and take 3 deep breaths. I mean, breathing, you hear, it gets a lot of lip service, but it really does work. When I need to start to really find some grounded place in me where I can be calm and present for other people, just taking 3 aware inhales and exhales can really do a lot to downregulate those intense red quadrant emotions I may be experiencing. So if I've done some things that have helped me be calm, then chances are then that becomes the contagion. And when we're using emotions that help improve a situation because I'm calm or an other desirable emotion, then we call that co-regulation. We see it a lot, again, as parents. If you have kids, you probably know this dynamic really well. Like if you're worked up about something, chances are your kids will get worked up about something. But when you can walk into a room and they're worked up and you're calm and you stay calm, oftentimes you can see the whole mood of the room shift. So, back to the employee with the sick aunt, if I'm really calm, then I'm going to help keep my employee calm, and we're going to find a way through it probably more effectively than if I'm panicky and she's sad and I'm trying to pretend like it's all going to be okay and I'm whitewashing it and pretending she's not sad. That we get uncomfortable around people's emotions, which is so ironic because we all have them. They feel deeply personal, but they're so universal. So just to meet people where they're at is a very powerful thing, and a manager can do to bond the team together and get it to move forward in a way that's productive to the work that has to be accomplished.
Wow. So modeling that, managing yourself, modeling it for others, and doing that in a genuine way. And I love the idea of that emotional contagion, in that we are all trying to take on different practices that allow us to prevent something from happening, a virus from spreading. Yes. And you talked about going outside for 2 minutes. You're actually distancing yourself, like socially distancing yourself from that red zone, and then purposefully, putting like a positive virus, if there is a such thing, out there with the more level-headed emotions after breathing. It's really interesting because part of the reason why so many businesses are doing things like turning their facilities into manufacturing plants for face masks and things like that is because they saw other businesses doing it. Mm-hmm. So it like spread, this cultural things just spread the same way, but in a positive direction.
Exactly. And so we have that power as leaders, and it's a power we should use wisely. And we can only unleash that power when we've regulated our own emotional state to something that's really conducive to a good outcome. And so that's table stakes, right? You have to do that in order to be in a position to really lead in a time like this. And people know that not everything is going to be good news. So if we as leaders have this tendency to try to whitewash the truth, or to somehow make things seem better than they are, most employees can, smoke that out pretty quickly, and it leads to a lack of trust. And so again, for a leader to then work on how they express and communicate authentically, and also find a way to reassure when it's appropriate, but to speak plainly about the truth. We want that. We're all adults. We're working through incredibly strange circumstances. And so if you're going to withhold things from me, or if you're going to tell me that you're okay and you're perfect, then I'm probably going to wonder what's really going on. And employees are oftentimes looking for the things you're not saying. They're looking for the meaning in what you're not saying. And so to the extent we can really dig deep and find an authentic way to say, you know what, I'm nervous too, or I didn't agree with the decision that we made, but here we are, and I know we're all committed to making the best of the situation, and so let's move forward in this way. That goes a long way with people. So communicating authentically, sharing some of your own emotional ups and downs can be bonding, and also really helping people see and look forward is important. And doing a lot of check-ins with employees is also critical. How are you? How are you feeling? What feels really challenging to you right now? And how can I support you? Those are the kinds of I just actually talked with a director today at a big manufacturing organization. He says, literally this week, I'm starting every meeting with asking people how they're feeling. And this is pretty new for him to do that. Mm-hmm. But his employees really appreciate it because they recognize they're all going through something right now. And it's important for him to understand what kind of emotional capacity he's working with.
How do you avoid, so here's a practical question. I am in front of a employee and they are despondent and they look like that. So I say, hey, what's going on? Like, what are you feeling right now? And they tell me. It's so tempting to want to whitewash their emotion for them.
Yes.
How do we avoid that?
Yes, it is. Well, I'm curious what ideas you have, Chris, because it's individual, right? Because we all face that discomfort. I think, first of all, for us to acknowledge, like, wow, their story just made me so uncomfortable and I feel so awkward right now. It's okay to feel awkward. That's normal too.
Yeah.
And to just I take a breath and express some good listening skills or some compassion to their circumstance. Wow, that sounds really hard. I don't even know how you made it into work today. That sounds so hard. But you're here now. Do you need to be here? Or can I cover for you? Or how are we going to get through the day? Because, we don't want our customers to feel the contagion that you're giving off right now, which is warranted, by the way. So how do we help you get through the day?
Yeah. And if they don't have any answers to that question, it's like, okay, I mean, it may be that age-old thing where as a manager or as a leader, you might want to fix everything, but you just need to dwell in the dysfunction of things that you don't have. You can't wave a wand and fix somebody's emotions. That actually isn't your job, right? So maybe just sitting with it. Like you said, I love that. Awkward is okay. And I think there's a lot of people that are having awkward conversations because they're just starting to really communicate because they actually have to now more than they ever have, but it's healthy. And really, the closer you are with people, the more awkwardness you can stand, but it doesn't mean it's devoid of awkwardness.
Yeah, exactly. One of our co-founders is Dr. Mark Brackett, who runs the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and he wrote a book last year called Permission to Feel. And that title was very consciously chosen because one of the things in our society we don't often give ourselves or others is that permission. And, now more than ever, we need to acknowledge that how we feel is not always pleasant, and that it's not about grabbing the brass ring of happiness. It's really about grappling with the emotional reality we're experiencing today. And when we do that, we can find a way through that offers greater hope and possibility in the future. So to that end, we have to give ourselves permission to feel these unpleasant emotions, and we have to give ourselves permission to others to feel them too, and to accept them as they are. So I'm always, I know that we're talking to people who are leaders and managers and owners of businesses who have employees that they need to perform. So in no way is this saying you're off the hook for performing, but we're also in really crazy uncharted territory here. And so to pretend like your employees are not impacted is a recipe for having them burn out, not show up, not perform, and you'd be worse off as an owner than if you simply said, wow, your expression looks extremely sad today. What's happening? How are you feeling? And having a 5-minute conversation that might be the only thing this person needed to feel a little better, that somebody cared and somebody heard them. And there's nothing their manager can do to solve their problem for them or make them feel any better, but just getting it off their chest to express it to someone who listened to them might be the difference between sulking all day or not able to focus and the opposite of being able to perform and be present for people and do their very best work.
Yeah, that's what a great point. And you might also be the only point of contact outside of their home. At this point, we're so isolated. And if we're essential, if we are still holding jobs, like the most social interaction we have outside of our TV and the call from our parents is our coworkers and our boss.
Yes, exactly.
One of the things that you have in this guide, and as we wrap up here, I think it's really important, is the emotional charter of a business, because we're talking about almost this culture now where there is this mutual understanding that we're all going through this hard time together, and making it a part of the business rather than just a reaction that is here now but disappears after the crisis is over. Using this as an opportunity to establish this almost as a norm moving forward. Sounds like the emotional charter is a good place to start. Could you walk us through that? What is that?
Yeah, it's actually, it sounds complicated, doesn't it? But it's actually really simple. And it could be as simple as, doing a huddle with your team and saying how, we're in for probably another tough week. And so how would you like to feel when you're at work this week? Or how would you like to feel more often during this time? And letting each person express some emotion. Maybe they want to feel satisfied. Maybe they want to feel content. Maybe they just want to feel calm. So that's question number one, is to establish the charter, is to find out how people want to feel. Then secondly, you ask the question of, what would it take to feel that way more often? And let people describe, what kinds of behaviors they would like to see from each other, or the way processes could work a bit differently that support the improved emotional state of the team. And so depending on the team size, you may take all of those emotions and say, we honor all of these. Or if it's a big team, you might say, how can we narrow this down to 3 emotions that we all agree that if we felt more often would really improve our workplace? And then you've got the first part of the charter. The second part is, like I mentioned, the behaviors we would want to engage in that would help us feel these emotions more often. The third part of the charter is to say, if we see people doing things that are not upholding the charter, what will we do in response to that? And so in essence, you're giving permission to the team to say, you know what, you just snapped at your coworker. That's not upholding the charter. Can you somehow adjust your response? Or do you need to take a 5-minute break if you're feeling really frustrated right now? Something like that, so that we can call people out when we're creating unconsciously an environment we don't want to be in emotionally. Mm-hmm. So it just comes down to those 3 questions. And to formalize it as a leader could be as simple as printing it out on a piece of paper and then asking people to sign it and posting it somewhere. So, I did this with a company not too long ago that has a pretty big corporate headquarters, and they made posters out of it and put it in all of their conference rooms, so that anytime you go to meet, sometimes, you would always see the charter. And oftentimes in meetings, the charter would get discussed, because whatever is happening in the meeting probably has some impact on the way employees feel in that organization. So to work it into what you're doing on a daily basis makes it more relevant. When you catch yourself as a leader creating an environment that doesn't uphold the charter, that's a good check on ourselves as well. And it's just a recipe to take everyone's emotional considerations into play, because we know that when people are experiencing pleasant and positive emotions, they're likely making better decisions on behalf of the company. They are experiencing higher quality emotions with their colleagues and their customers. They are more creative and generally performing at a higher level. So emotions aren't just something it would be nice to pay attention to. They're actually essential to running a good business now more than ever.
I really like this, because we do think about all of the stuff that needs to get done in a business, and we have goals that we set for business. But the idea of how do I want to feel, and making it a tangible process that we all hold each other and ourselves accountable for, is such a great idea. And mixed in with just the permission to feel, and the culture of reaching out and understanding each other in the workplace, it seems like a recipe for a really great culture moving forward. Andrea, this is really awesome. I appreciate you taking time to walk through some of these concepts. There's a lot more in the book, in this little guide here. So how do we stay in touch with you and what you all are doing at Oji, and get this guide for ourselves?
Well, assuming that people can access the ebook from even your site too, it's free, and we specifically made it to help people during this time. We started looking at how can we spread what we know to as many people as possible to help them through a difficult time. So I just want your listeners to know that it's a free resource, and hopefully they can access it through your site.
Mm-hmm.
And
also link to that.
Yeah, and you can also put my contact information there to make it easy to find me. But also you could find it at our website, which is ojlifelab.com. And there's a page built that you can just go download this resource. And the interview you mentioned at the end is typewritten into the book. It's an interview with Dr. Mark Brackett and Dr. Robin Stern, who are co-authors of the model that we teach around emotional intelligence. So we're going to post that video as well. So if you'd like to watch the video interview in real time, that's also another available resource. And next week, we'll be doing a webinar with Mark Brackett to talk about specifically anxiety and other unpleasant emotions during this time, and his advice and regulation strategies that can help support people while they're sheltering in place. So there's lots of free resources available to people. And I would welcome hearing from your listeners if there's other ideas or things that we can do that can be helpful during this time.
Great. Thank you so much for making those available and for joining us on the show again. Great to have you back, and I hope you stay safe, sane at home, and emotionally healthy.
Yes. Thank you, Chris. It's been great talking to you again.
Well, I don't know about you, but this has been such a timely conversation. So thankful to have this right now because, again, emotions are running high right now in you, in me, all over the place. And so having this kind of information, having this framework to work through these emotions and, reframe some of them as we were talking about in this conversation is so, so helpful. And each time I talk to Andrea on the show, it's like I feel more equipped to tackle the world out there and the world in me, if we're being honest. So a huge thank you to Andrea. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights with us. It's just really invaluable, and it's going to help us a ton. Thank you so much. Now, if you want the guide that we were discussing, the Coping with Corona ebook, I have links to the PDFs of those books in the show notes for this episode. There are several editions. Just click on all three and download them as a PDF. And those are free to you from Oji Life Lab. And I would encourage you to go to their website to find more great information over at ojlifelab.com. That's OJI lifelab.com. There's a lot of great resources there. Now, if you have any comments or questions as a follow-up to this episode or any other episode, then email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. I would love to hear from you. Any feedback that you have, any comments or suggestions, things like that. Always open to those communications as we're trying to always make this show better and more relevant and helpful to you in your career, especially now. And you can also email me to inquire about Keys to the Shop consulting. I posted this on LinkedIn, but I'll mention it here also that I am drastically reducing the hourly rate of my over-the-phone consultation, which right now is really the only consultation that I can do. Usually we offer in-person consultation too, but over-the-phone consultation is very, very helpful to have somebody to walk through problems that you're having or challenges, work through some ideas and get some solutions in place for what you're going through in the shop. So be that personnel, operations, leadership, just anything that's on your mind, we can talk about. And again, I've drastically reduced the hourly rate for over-the-phone consultation. So if that's interesting to you and you want to explore that, I would love to hear from you. chris@keystotheshop.com. Really just want to open up as many channels as I can to help the community. So hopefully that is helpful to you. So anyway, that is our show today. Thank you again for joining me. I appreciate all of you. I hope you stay safe and healthy. We are going to get through this. Stay optimistic, stay positive, help each other. Let's keep connecting and keep working for our community. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.